Hello, this is part 2 on Herman Lindsay Duffy Holbrook's interview. Mr. Holbrook had got invited to go study GOULDs TURKEY out in Mexico with a group of people, and this shows that they almost got in trouble. And also, he talks about his good friend Archibald Rutledge and the acquaintance they had with him, and who his favorite hunting partner is.
Hidalgo County, and the Palancios Mountains comes right down the border between New Mexico and Arizona. And this one subspecies of turkeys is endangered in the U.S. See? It's called the GOULDs turkey. Okay. The Forest Service and the New Mexico Game and Fish got together and they wanted to evaluate what they had down there and these GOULDs turkeys, and they got up a team where we had a half a dozen teams of a guy that knew the country and a guy that could call turkeys, and then they called me and asked me to help in Atlanta. My boss in Atlanta said, "I'm not going to pay for you to go to New Mexico." And I told them, and they said, "We'll pay for you to come on over here." So they covered the cost and everything. So I went over there. Well, as nobody else had talked as much as I did. And there's nobody else to call turkeys, see? And so I got there, and then they wanted a program for the New Mexico Turkey Federation of interpreting turkey calls. Well, hell, I did that, you know. And in other words, I was doing multitask there. And then they teamed me that first morning with a guy named Steve Dobrock. And Steve was a wildlife biologist that was the manager of the Gray Ranch. The Gray Ranch is a 500 square mile ranch. Quite a damn ranch. And it's right down in there on that canyon. Has all of the Animas Mountain, goes clear across to the Palancios Mountains. So now this fella had never heard anybody call turkeys. And so anyway, that first morning he and I went out there. And then way off we heard a gobbling, way over there. And we came up out of the creek bottom, and then it was open all the way across there. And I said, "Wait a minute, we ain't gonna go across there. We don't know what else is around here." So I was calling good because I had worked at it, you know. And I started calling, and I called soft and modulated, and there was a bunch of hen turkeys down here to my left, right here. If we'd have stepped up there, we'd have screwed all that up, see? And I started talking to them, and we saw a couple of them flying down out in that open spot. Here they came right to us. And these turkeys are slightly bigger than the eastern wild turkey, and got a greenish iridescence. And they're beautiful. I'll show you some. So we just doubled up like 2 more rocks, and there's old big rocks sitting out there everywhere. So we just sat there like this, rolled our eyes around there, and we were wide open where they could see us, but they couldn't interpret what we were. They got there, and then they waited for this turkey to call in to talk to him, to come on over there, and didn't say anything else, so they went back into the Emery Oak. See? And then there was another hen turkey. Now, she was not a member of this group of half a dozen hens that talked soft and everything. And she came from way over there, and she said, "Chow, chow, chow, chow." And that's the only way she talked. So she got out there, and she was past me here. And that old gobbler was gobbling and gobbling, and none of these half a dozen hens acknowledged him, and that big old hen that I was talking to didn't acknowledge him, so I ignored him. And he got madder and madder. And he was coming across that thing, that open place, just as hard as he could come. Stripping, man, big son of a gun. And this guy had never heard anybody call turkeys. And the way they were responding, gullible, you know, it was beautiful. Bill, you'd have loved it. That hen turkey was crossing here, and I said, chow, 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 chow. I was using mouth yelpers. And she stopped, and she looked, and she said, chow, 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 chow. And then I said, chow, 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 chow. And that was all the authority she needed. Here she came. And of course, this old gobbler, he's fussing and stewing, and he's coming on. And that's what you see in here. Okay, well, you see that open place he came across. He strutted all the way from way over there across here, giving me hell and gobbling. There he is at 25 feet, see? And they'd given me a camera, and it didn't have but 2 exposures. And I said, yeah. I figured it'd be a good story to tell when I got back to Atlanta, you know. And that dude, when he came by the oak tree that I was on my knees behind, about to reach my hand out there, he was as close as that box to me when he came by. And Steve was wearing a pair of light gray gloves, just about like a turkey gobbler's head, you know. He grabbed for his feet, and that gobbler took him away from him, and he shoved his hand at him just like that. When he did, that gobbler stabbed him right there with a nubby spur. He was a full-grown old gobbler, but he just had nubby spurs, just big old nubs. He said, "Boom!" And Steve shoved his hand at him again, and that gobbler, then they were both lying because either one of them could have got the other one. And then he started backing off, and that big gobbler was coming after him. He got that big gobbler way forward on his feet, and that time when he grabbed, he got both feet. And I took my Dillon Forest Service coat off. So we each had a series of canyons we were supposed to go to, one here and one there and one there, and then everybody's going to go to another set. So I said, we're going to have to break this pattern up. You go to the next canyon, get them before they get through, tell them to go out and find every other crew and tell them to meet us out at the crossroads and bring their cameras and their notebooks, but don't tell them why. Okay. So we held that gobbler, took him out to the crossroads. He got the message out. One of those guys coming there, last crew coming in. What the hell are you doing? Well, didn't you say you wanted feathers? Feathers! He said. I said, you know, go look in the truck. There's Steve. He walked to look over and Steve holding that big gobbler. He bounced back. Barnyard. I said, no barnyard there. Bill, that's as wild as any gobbler you got in these mountains right there. And he had tried to get permission to take one gobbler because it hadn't been a GOULDs turkey identified positively in about 25 years. And the endangered species people said, oh, hell, no. But anyway, we had a damn turkey there. So and that's what these other creatures.
So y'all were just supposed to be out evaluating the population by just being out listening and observing, and y'all caught one by hand?
We're catching them down turkey.
The first I've ever heard of catching one by hand.
Well, nobody's ever caught one by hand. Nobody gonna catch another one.
You're lucky you didn't have spares.
That tree right there that you see me behind, that's the tree that I was at. He passed to my right hand on the near side of that brush. And there's Steve there, and Steve doubled up laughing because I was telling him what he was going to do. I said, if they put you in court, you plead self-defense. thought that he was going to attack you sexually, and you were defending yourself. And we were laughing so damn hard we could hardly hold still. There's Steve with that gobbler. There they are measuring. You see the W spur, I think, on that shot there. You see that white rump patch and the white border on his tail and green iridescence. And we had the table, so all the subspecies, so we had a positive identification. Measure. Well, that, you can imagine how much fame and fortune that brought around to it, and how much attention the GOULDs TURKEY program got in New Mexico right there. And it was enough to where they had assigned a graduate student to go down there and work. He went down there to work, and this gobbler here was with another big gobbler, a set of hens, and the other gobbler and the hens ran off, but this gobbler started bird dogging him. And Bill's, I'll show you the letter. They mistreated him once. But this was a little over a year later, and a mile and a half from where we caught him. That's where that gobbler was. So there he is, he's stalking that graduate student.
That's the same gobbler?
That's the same gobbler. No spurs. The other gobbler had spurs. I mean, that's how close he came to Steve, see? Or to Tom Potter, I mean. See, that's a beautiful bird. He sure is terribly mixed up. And this is a shot that when we got feathers and everything and made all the measurements and they got all the pictures and one of them turned him loose and that's him running off. He ran off the waist and he says, cut, cut! Just like an old gobbler will do if he comes up behind you and sees the side of your face here. You know, he said, cut, cut, and runs. I said, sorry, buddy, but you've been bad, you know.
I need to put it down.
So, then he took off and he landed on top of a wall of mine way over there, and he still didn't know what to tell. This letter was a spoof. But I'll let you all read it. Read it out loud there.
Dear Mr. Dobro, is that his name? Dobro? Dubrow. As you are aware, wild turkeys in New Mexico are protected as game species, and any form of taking is strictly regulated. Those turkeys in southern Hidalgo County are further protected as an endangered species, being so listed in State Game Commission Regulation Number 599 from the Wildlife Conservation Act. These turkeys are regarded as a form of, it's a scientific name, the so-called Mexican or GOULDs turkey. It has come to my attention that you were party to the unauthorized capture, retention, and removal of feathers from a male Mexican turkey in the mountains in April 1982. Ordinarily, such actions would merit the assurance of a citation and subsequent prosecution in magistrate's court. However, because of the somewhat bizarre circumstances surrounding the taking of this turkey, it can be argued that it was part of an effort at least quasi-sanctioned by the Department of Game and Fish. That being the case, I have decided to issue each of you a verbal warning instead of a citation. In issuing this verbal warning, I am opting for the least severe of the options that are available. The verbal warning is being sent to all the residents involved in the act, from the person who captured the bird to those who participated in the removal and retention of feathers. Since the capture of the bird was illegal, feathers obtained from it are contraband and are to be turned over to this department as soon as possible. I hope that you will view this verbal warning in a constructive manner. It is not intended to embarrass or harass you, but rather to serve notice to you violated the law unnecessarily and in a manner that could have been avoided. I trust that there will be no repetition of this type of incident, and that you will agree. Better coordination would be the best policy for the future. Sincerely, Jim Ball, Chief Wildlife Law Enforcement.
Now that
is pretty wild.
that's pretty wild.
Did you say he had on gloves?
Yeah.
And he thought the gobbler thought it was like another gobbler?
Yeah, he shoved it right at him. He didn't give him a chance to think. He was immediately after he hit him here with a spurt. He was going after him with that hand, and that took that gobbler's complete attention. And then he backed off, and that gobbler got weight forward where he couldn't spring him. Boy, he ran so quick.
So he took his hand like it was another gobbler's head.
Yeah.
Looking at him.
And they were both lying because they were both faint. I don't think I told you all that today.
Yeah, he said, a couple of us stayed after class and he told us that story.
This is Mr. Rutledge, right on the front Hampton plantation steps. And how this came about, I was driving with a family and the two youngsters down there on Echaw Causeway and flushed 6 big gobblers when we had a fall hunting season for gobblers. And I ran them down through the swamp. The swamp was dry at the time and broke them up pretty good. And then I stopped by Mr. Rutledge and I said, Mr. Rutledge, if you let me, I will go in there tomorrow morning and get you a gobbler. And he said, go ahead. So I went in there and he wanted to know everything that happened, you know. And those gobblers couldn't call good at all. They sounded like great blue herons. And but this was the first one that came out of the swamp, and there's an old log road, trace of a log road there, and I saw him when he stepped up out of the swamp onto that road, and he stretched up like that, and he said, cut! He wanted an answer. And I said, go, 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 go! And he just ducked his head and he started walking. And he got where I wanted to, and I shot. And then I carried the turkey to Mr. Rutledge, and he said, now go back and get yourself one. And I went back out and got myself one. Now I really didn't have all this figured out ahead, you know. And then he wanted some more turkeys, and I hunted for him once or twice more, and then he says, now you can hunt on Hampton anytime you want to, and we'll just keep doing it the same way. I'll eat one and you eat one. And that was the beginning of that relationship right there. Now this was taken in the 50s, and that fellow on my left is Jim Anderson, and he was a game warden from Cordsville. And that picture was taken at the old work center, and those saddle shoes, those were my swamp shoes. Rogers, who was a junior forester on the Wamba, took this picture, and he was marking some timber on the inside of the wire, that 26-mile fence. And right at 4 sunset, he broke up a flock of turkeys close to the wire. And when he got back to McClellanville, he called me and told me. And I said, well, that's King Wilson. He'll let us on that land. And we can go back there in the morning and see if I can call one out over the wire. And I got over there with Al, and that's the one that came out over the wire. Miss Eleanor there with me, we've been married for 60 years. And how many mornings I've gotten up at 4 o'clock and gone hunting. This past season, I don't drive anymore, so she got up at 4 o'clock with me and drove me out there in the woods, and then she'd read and sleep a little and wait for me until I got through and come back. And that's my hunting partner there.